Thank you so much, Tina. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. And I have to admit, I'm a little out of my league talking about ethics. It's not something I generally think that much about. But let me kind of run you into this. So, man, how do you even start? I'd like to say, first of all, don't be freaked out that I talk about genetics. Genetics is actually just another digital technology. I actually look at it as software engineering for these squishy little computers we call cells. And frankly, it's if you use computers at all, you really have a foundation in genetics. Ethics, though, are a little more challenging. I didn't start off to be a scientist at all. In fact, I don't even consider myself a great scientist. I came into the world from computers, but I realized I don't really like computers. They end up in landfill in 5 years. They depreciate in 3 years on your CapEx. They really just aren't that important. I wanted to spend my life doing something that I was passionate about and really cared about. And when I looked at the mysteries of life, I was just hooked. So that's how I got started in genetics. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of ethical issues in genetics because, let's face it, medicine is just one of the most complex environments around, and it's really difficult to reach any type of consensus. And in fact, just so we're on the same page, let's just take a look at what ethics are. Ethics is actually the consideration of what is right and what is wrong. And what I've learned in that is everyone has an ethical perspective. The ethical perspective can be very different than the legal perspective. And trying to find consensus in ethics is virtually impossible, which is why you have great ethical debate and discussion, but sometimes you run into dilemmas. You just can't solve the issues. And there's no shortage of those issues in research and development. Now, as a genetic scientist, a lot of my work is focused on and is actually funded by the study of cancer. Cancer is a genetic disease. Think of it as disk corruption on your computer. Except that, if your computer gets disk corruption and dies, you put it off into a closet. With a living cell that's growing, the cancer, the cell just keeps growing and starts to essentially create an infection in your body and sometimes crash the network. So cancer has been at the root of my thinking for a long time. And I was really lucky because I was an academic one day working in kind of studying the mechanisms of genetics and cancer. And the next I was scooped up by one of the fastest growing and largest biotech companies in the world. So I have a very odd perspective. I've done research and development. And I actually got to see the world of cancer and drug development in some pretty unique ways. Now, I hate cancer because the treatments are barbaric. There's a beautiful book called The Emperor of All Maladies. If you haven't read it, check it out. It's kind of a history of cancer told by an oncologist. But the way we treat cancer is pretty barbaric. We essentially poison people. It's carpet bombing to get rid of these cancerous cells. And in fact, we use surgery, cut it out. We use radiation, burn it out or cook it. And then we use chemicals to essentially poison. And these chemicals were actually, the first ones were derivatives of chemical warfare agents used in World War I. Today we have much more specific chemicals to go after cancer cells. They're targeted medicines. They go after some biological target. But the problem is they're really expensive. In 2013, virtually every cancer medicine, there was a number of them approved, all started, had a price tag of over $100,000 per year for the treatment. Some of these newer treatments can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, and with copays these days running around 30%, it can bankrupt people, just a single drug. This really frustrated me when I was working in the biotech industry, because we all have little supercomputers in our pockets. Why does this technology end up being so expensive and difficult to get. Like, if we have trouble getting these medicines, what's it like to someone in India or Pakistan? So this really started to affect me. And you might recognize this guy, the Pharma bro, who took a drug that was worth $1 and raised it to $750 per pill. But I think he's actually doing a really wonderful thing in some ways, because he's drawing attention to an industry that just doesn't make any economic sense. He's not the only one pricing medicines at some crazy rate. It's every drug company in the world. And we just accept it. It's time for a change because it is so unsustainable. But the thing that really bugs me about cancer and drug development is the medicines just aren't that effective. It's why Angelina Jolie chose prophylactic removal of her breasts. It's why we lost David Bowie a few weeks ago. And one that hit me particularly hard was Steve Jobs when he died of cancer. What this means is it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how innovative you are or connected you are. It doesn't matter how famous you are. These drugs won't work. That is really eye-opening when the system just doesn't work. And in fact, I just say cancer medicines suck. It needs a change. And even if you look at the history of improvement in cancer, because we love to celebrate improvement, this is 20 years of cancer progress measured as 5-year relative survival. And you can see, wow, we got a 4% improvement, at all sites. Oh, wow, breasts, we've got 8%. So very, very small incremental improvements in survival over a 20-year R&D period. This to me is unacceptable coming from a background of digital technologies and computers. And that's what motivated me to think and ask, is there a better way of doing it? Ultimately, I'm less of a scientist and more of a hacker. I like to take things apart and play with things. And after I left the pharmaceutical industry because it didn't sit well with me. Because at the end of the day, if you need a drug to be alive or to not suffer, and I'm not giving it to you because you don't have the money, at the very best, I'm a jerk. On the worst end of the spectrum, I'm a murderer. And so I had to find a better way. Then I went to Thailand. To the full moon parties in Hat Rin, and I realized drugs are cheap. They're really cheap, and you can do clinical trials in very different settings. And in fact, we know drugs are cheap. Breaking Bad. The thing I realized was it's making legal drugs that are expensive. And that's because legal drugs essentially have to be put through clinical trials in a very formal way, and we have to show you that they're effective and that they're safe. So I decided, let's just start from scratch. Let's try it a different way. Now, I am a genetic engineer, so I get to work with some really awesome things. And I'm a microbiologist and virologist at kind of the lowest level. I'm not working with humans so much. This is a virus. And viruses have very, very tiny genomes because they're not really alive. They need a cell to kind of grow and replicate in. So think of them as a molecular USB stick. They load programs into cells. So over 10 years ago, someone put a paper on my desk for something I'd never heard of before called oncolytic viruses. And what that means is it's a virus that infects cancer cells and kills them, but doesn't infect normal cells. And this is awesome because now I could see a path here to being able to genetically engineer viruses to kill cancer cells. And so I knew how to do that. And I knew something else. I knew that I could make those viruses using digital tools. This is actually a molecular model of a virus. Scientists generate these things using some really interesting technologies. But the cool thing is you can actually download, all this information is public. And I thought, what if you can 3D print these? What if you can make them all digital? And this is, in fact, a 3D printed virus. It's made of plastic. It's not going to treat you. It could hurt you if I threw it at you. But I thought, how do I make 3D printed viruses? We all know rapid prototyping, 3D printing is an amazing way to make complex things fast and cheap digitally. So this is what I've been working on with an awesome team of people at Autodesk. Now, Autodesk, as you may or may not be aware of, makes digital tools for design. Usually it's buildings, it can be cars, airplanes, all sorts of different products. We make all these different digital tools, but we didn't have digital tools for bio-nano. And 4 years ago, the company founded a bio-nano group and hired me into it. And this is the type of software we're making. It gives us molecular control, atomic control over these types of agents. And so this is using one of the tools we've been developing. It allows us to pull the thing apart. And again, we can drill down to atomic precision with this type of tool. So now I had a design tool for viruses, which is amazing. And we're still working on these technologies, but this is kind of the foundation of it. But I also have a printer. This is a company called Gen 9 in Boston. There's other groups like it. But what they do is they actually take genetic designs and they print the DNA. It's like compiling a program. So this allows me to essentially give me a real-world output of my digital designs. So they can print whole viral genomes now, which they do for me. And then we put the DNA, we essentially put that DNA into cells to make virus particles using this device. This is one of the first robotic labs in the world. It's based in Menlo Park. It's a company called Transcriptic. The CEO is 26 years old and brilliant. There's about 30 or 40 people in this. But now I can have a full digital path from my computer to design all the way to making a medicine. And again, I can do it all from my laptop, from wherever I am. And 2 years ago, we booted up our first synthetic virus at Autodesk. It got a lot of attention at the time because Autodesk wasn't known for doing this type of stuff. But it was really fantastic. It's only 5,386 bits of genetic code. It's really tiny. Wherever you see a spot on that growth plate is where a synthetic virus is booted up and it started killing bacteria. So it creates a little clearing. This isn't a cancer-fighting virus. This is an antibiotic. But all I have to do is change the program to change the virus, because it's essentially 3D printed. Now, this isn't new science. In fact, the science behind this actually was done over 10 years ago. The thing that I've just done is gone end to end with no human hands touching the process, which I think is pretty remarkable. And so did Paolo Antonelli, because MoMA called me up when they saw this and they said, can we acquire this project? And so, as far as I know, this virus is the first synthetic organism in the MoMA. The thing that I love about this work is it changes the game. It allows me to essentially make medicines for one person at a time, because no two cancers are the same. Cancer is unique to you. It's your cells essentially acting as an infection in your body. No one else's cancer is the same. So taking a mass market medicine doesn't make any sense. You need a personalized medicine. This technology allows me to make a personalized medicine for one person, and to do it cheap, and to connect people to it. And what I realized is if you can make a medicine for just one person, you actually change the entire game of clinical trials. That's the most expensive and time-consuming part. And now you throw it away because the medicine will never be used on a second person. Some of the strategies and design elements may be reused, but the medicine won't be. So it's moving away from a product to a platform. And that's a game changer. And that's what I spend most of my time working on now. In fact, we're working before we go to humans, because this is so new and we have to prove it to people, I'm working in dogs. And this has been a big step for me because later this year, this summer, we expect to do the first clinical trial of one of these synthetic viruses in a dog with bone cancer. And then I'd like to do 10 dogs and 100 dogs and then 1,000 dogs and literally bring the most state-of-the-art treatment to dogs and get people to realize we can have this too. The beautiful part about this whole process is it's digital. And everything digital just gets faster, better, cheaper. The virus cost me $1,000 to make the first time. Eventually, I expect it'll cost about $1 because the entire process will be fast and digital. And the thing that really powers this whole process, though, from diagnostics to design to production, is really community. Because the only way I can do this is to have veterinary partners, to have companies like Autodesk to make tools, to have companies like Transcriptic to make robots, to have scientists with expertise in virology and cancer connect and share their designs. So all of this is open source, which is really amazing. The whole idea that you guys, designers, scientists, can have your own pharma company just really blows my mind. But that's a little bit in the future. What about today? What about something a little more pertinent today in ethics and biotech in the paper? You may have heard of something called CRISPR. If you haven't heard of it yet, now that I've said it to you, CRISPR, just think crispy chicken, you'll see it everywhere because it's in the papers almost every day now. This is a new tool that was developed about 4 years ago. And it came out of the microbial community, and it's actually based on a type of immunity that bacteria have against viruses that infect bacteria. How do they defend themselves against viruses? And when they understood how this worked, they realized they could use it as a tool for genetic editing. And all of a sudden, we started to see articles like this. Genetic surgery could be done by this new tool. We can literally, using this tool, cut out a piece of DNA and deactivate a gene, for example, a pathway in the cell, or we could put in DNA. It's basically just search and replace for any genetic material. It was first researched in bacteria, but it'll work on humans, it'll work on animals. It's basically a universal technology. But the ethical issues started to come up because people said, we can use this to do genetic surgery on human embryos in IVF. Now, I have an IVF baby. This whole process is done in a lab, in a dish. And today it's so sophisticated, they can pluck out a single cell from a fertilized embryo. And they can do a full genetic workup on it. And if they found a serious genetic error, CRISPR could be used to replace it, to fix it. Of course, just as easily, you could say, I want my baby to have blue eyes. So it raises all of these ethical arguments. There was whispers that the Chinese were doing this in 2014. And in 2015, they admitted, yeah, we're doing some work on embryos. Now, they're not making babies yet. This is just all in a lab. But this really, people started, ooh, those Chinese, they're so bad. But they're doing a whole bunch of animal work too. They've been doing it on dogs, et cetera. And by the way, these gene-edited dogs are amazing. They work with a gene called myostatin. It turns them, bulks them up, and makes them look like super dogs. It's kind of awesome. One of my colleagues, George Church at Harvard, started to work with pigs. And he actually smashed the record. He did 63 different gene edits in a pig genome to humanize the pig. Because if you can humanize a pig, then you can take the organs out of the pig and use them in transplants for humans. We make 1 billion pigs a year just for food. There would be no shortages of organs for transplantation if we could use this technology. Which, by the way, we are always facing shortages of organs for transplantation. Every time cars get safer, you end up getting fewer organs. So this is an amazing technology when properly applied. In December, there was a giant gene summit. All these scientists came in to Washington to talk about what should we do with this. And they go into these deep dive discussions. But the comment that I saw coming out of this meeting that was kind of surprising is they said it would be irresponsible to pursue this in humans right now. Of course, a patient who was a mother of a child that had a serious genetic defect, who gave testimony at this meeting, kind of summed it up for me. He was 6 days old and he suffered every day. If you have the skills and knowledge to fix these diseases, just frickin' do it. She was the only patient advocate at this meeting. So scientists often get a little tied up in the technology and their internal discussions. But believe me, if you were the mother or father of a child with a serious genetic disorder, you would chase this stuff down because you just want to be healthy. So we get some very different perspectives here. Just this last week, however, in the last couple of weeks, the UK authorized the use of research on human embryos. So it was irresponsible a couple of months ago, but clearly we've sorted that out. And just a few days ago, Editas, one of the companies that was founded in this space, had a successful IPO, kind of going against the wave of fear and negativity going on in the economic world right now, raised about $100 million, and they're moving along. In fact, there's billions of dollars at stake in this technology. So, they worry about slippery slopes in a lot of these things. This is a slippery slope that's pretty much a race to the bottom, and I thought this little picture from Calvin and Hobbes kind of sums it up. So this is an ethical issue that's kind of playing out right now, and you have a voice in this type of stuff. You should be thinking about it, because it will potentially affect your life when it comes to the treatment of disease. It could potentially affect your children's lives. Oh, and by the way, in a security briefing just a few days ago, one of the top officials that do threat assessments in national security said that this technology is actually a weapon of mass destruction, because you could essentially create viruses that do gene editing in large populations. He said the basic materials are $60, and we can't control them. So, always nice to know that the stuff that you work on is a weapon of mass destruction. The intersection, though, of technology and ethics is happening really hard these days. I don't know how to deal with all of this. In fact, one of the areas where it's immediate is just in the area of self-driving cars. The Tesla today has a pretty decent autopilot function. It's only going to get better. But some of the discussions that have come around to this are really fascinating, because cars, as we know, get into accidents. And there's always things that happen on the road where you have to make split-second decisions and react. Now, if it's a human doing a reaction, you don't do this consciously. If you're swerving to avoid something that's fallen off of a truck and you hit another vehicle, it's an accident. It was your monkey brain that made the decision as to go left or right. But with a computer, there is no monkey brain. It actually has to evaluate and make a choice, and that choice is ultimately dictated by code. And so they know that they have to put some sort of ethical framework into the code. It's pretty obvious. And those types of questions are being discussed now with software engineers doing this type of work. But it's going to come to medicine too, because I'm building a full robotic system for making cancer drugs. It's going to have to make choices for the drug design strategy. So the robots will essentially be doing the same type of decision making for your health. So we need to think of ethical frameworks for this whole system. And the more I thought about it, it's just like, it's almost going back to Asimov's laws of robotics, which he wrote in the 1940s. And perhaps we need some laws of robotics now for how these robots behave around human beings. Overall, though, I don't spend much time worrying about ethics. I trust why I'm doing things is for a good reason. And even though some people may worry about genetic engineering in general, because believe me, people ask me all the time, isn't making synthetic viruses dangerous? My response is, cancer is dangerous. And 1 in 3 of us will be affected by cancer in our lifetime, and we still haven't solved this problem. I don't worry so much about ethics in the immediate, because it's not a pragmatic guide. Laws are much more immediate for me. But we always have to think about the interplay of ethics and society and life. With that, I'll say thank you.